In 2024, parts of West and Southern Africa learned a hard lesson. The internet is not floating in the air. It is lying on the ocean floor. When major subsea cable outages disrupted services, the problem did not feel like an engineering footnote. It touched mobile data. It touched business operations. It touched online services that people now expect to work every day. And that is the real story here. Africa is getting more fiber, more submarine cables, more data centers, more cloud gateways, more mobile data demand. But the question is not simply whether the continent gets faster internet. The question is, who controls the path? Because one tap on a phone can travel through a mobile tower, fiber backhaul, a data center, an internet exchange point, a submarine cable, and a cloud service before anything appears on the screen. Each layer has an owner. Each layer has rules. Each layer can become a bottleneck. Submarine fiber optic cables carry the overwhelming majority of international internet data traffic. That makes them critical infrastructure, not just technology. But the twist is this. The most important control point may not be the cable crossing the ocean. It may be the landing station where the cable comes ashore, or the inland fiber route that connects a city to the coast, or the mobile network that turns wholesale capacity into actual internet for millions of users, or the data center where African traffic can be hosted locally instead of traveling far away. And there's one strange clue that reveals how deep this goes. Some African internet traffic has historically traveled to Europe and back, even when both endpoints were in Africa. Why would that happen? To answer that, we have to ask 3 questions. Who actually controls Africa's internet as new fiber cables come online? Why does a new submarine cable not automatically mean cheap internet for everyone? And can African governments, companies, and regional institutions shape an open and resilient system? Or will the most valuable layers be captured elsewhere? But the outage is only the visible crack. To understand who controls the system, the story has to go back to when African connectivity was scarce, expensive, and concentrated. For much of the 1990s and early 2000s, internet access across many African countries expanded slowly. It often moved through universities, research networks, satellite links, early national internet service providers, and state-controlled telecom structures. Bandwidth existed, but it was scarce. It was expensive, and it was often concentrated in major cities and institutions. That matters because the internet did not arrive on an open field. It arrived through gatekeepers. Before the big fiber build-out, many countries depended heavily on satellite links and limited international gateways. A gateway is the point where a national network connects to the wider international internet. If only a few players can control that gateway, they can shape access and pricing. Then came an early fiber milestone. In 2001 and 2002, the SAT-3/WASC submarine cable system began service along the west coast of Africa, linked with SAFE toward Asia. It connected several coastal African countries to fiber. That was a major shift from satellite dependence. Fiber can transmit data as pulses of light through glass strands. It offers far higher capacity and lower latency than older satellite or copper systems. But there was a problem. In some markets, access to SAT-3/WASC was largely controlled by incumbent telecom operators. Incumbents are the older, established operators that often inherited state telecom networks or monopoly positions. So even when fiber arrived at the coast, competitive price reductions did not always reach the broader market. This is the first lesson of the fiber revolution. A cable can increase capacity, but if access is controlled, the benefit can stop at the landing point. And this old structure shaped what came next. Africa did not begin the fiber era with equal access, equal competition, or equal geography. It inherited monopoly structures, coastal advantages, and high-cost bottlenecks. Then, beginning in 2009, a new wave of cables started to change the map, but the question became whether more capacity would actually translate into more control for users. In 2009, SEACOM launched commercial service along Africa's eastern and southern coastline. It is widely viewed as a turning point for East African bandwidth because it helped reduce reliance on satellites and lowered wholesale international capacity costs. That same year, the team's cable connected Kenya to the United Arab Emirates. Kenya gained additional international capacity, supporting Nairobi's emergence as a regional digital and technology hub. Then came EASSE in 2010, adding redundancy and competition along the eastern seaboard. Redundancy simply means having backup routes, so one failure does not break the whole system. On the West Coast, MainOne launched in 2010, connecting Nigeria and Ghana to Europe. WACS entered service in 2012, linking southern and West African countries to Europe. ACE also began service in phases in 2012, increasing connectivity options for West African coastal states. On a map, this looks like a breakthrough, and in many ways it was. Africa moved away from acute international bandwidth scarcity. More routes meant more capacity. More capacity meant more room for competition. More competition could reduce wholesale costs. But here's the question a viewer should ask right now. If all these cables arrived, why can internet still be expensive or unreliable for users? Because the ocean crossing is only one part of the price. After a cable lands, bandwidth still has to move inland. It has to pass through landing stations, national backbones, metro fiber, towers, routers, power systems, and retail networks. It has to reach the phone in a market where most users in sub-Saharan Africa access the internet primarily through mobile networks rather than fixed broadband. So the bottleneck moved. It did not disappear. It moved from the international cable into domestic networks, regulators, power systems, and last-mile economics. Last mile means the final connection to the user, whether that is a mobile tower, a home connection, or a business line. This is why a cable landing is a beginning, not an ending. More international capacity can help, but it does not automatically create cheap retail internet. Prices also depend on landing access, domestic backhaul, taxes, retail competition, device affordability, and last-mile networks. If more cables did not automatically solve the problem, then the next layer to examine is geography. Who gets to be near the landing points and who pays to reach them? Zoom out to the continental map, and the internet starts to look less like cyberspace and more like physical geography. Coastal cities have an obvious advantage. Lagos, Accra, Abidjan, Mombasa, Djibouti, Cape Town, Durban, Luanda, Maputo, Casablanca-adjacent routes in North Africa. These places sit closer to where submarine cables come ashore. That does not guarantee cheap internet, but it gives them a starting advantage. A landing city can become a gateway for bandwidth, data centers, cloud links, mobile networks, and regional traffic. It can attract infrastructure because the cable is nearby, the market is large, or the city already has power, ports, and business demand. Now look inland. For a landlocked country, every gigabit has to cross someone else's territory before it reaches the sea. It may depend on another country's fiber, another regulator, another border, another commercial transit agreement, and another set of rights-of-way. That is the hidden geography tax. It is not a tax bill you see at the end of the month. It is embedded in the route. It can show up as higher wholesale costs, fewer backup paths, more political exposure, or longer delays when networks expand. And the internet is often buried beside older infrastructure. Fiber routes can follow roads, railways, pipelines, and power transmission corridors. That detail matters. It means Africa's digital map is partly shaped by older maps, ports, capitals, highways, railways, energy corridors, and regional trade routes. A fiber trench is modern, but the route it follows may reflect decades of infrastructure decisions made before the digital economy existed. So when people say the internet connects everyone instantly, that is only partly true. The signal may move at extraordinary speed, but the network has to be built through land, laws, permits, electricity systems, and borders. Geography explains why the fiber revolution started unevenly, but geography does not decide the final outcome. This is the midpoint of the story. History explains the scarcity. Coastlines explain the first advantage. Landlocked routes explain the extra cost. But regulation, competition, and infrastructure strategy decide whether the system remains uneven. This is the midpoint setup. Geography explains the starting position, but the next act reveals where governments, regulators, and companies choose whether fiber becomes open infrastructure or another control bottleneck. Now the story turns from what Africa inherited to what Africa chooses. Governments and regulators decide who can land cables. They decide who can operate gateways. They decide who gets rights of way to dig trenches or use utility corridors. They shape who can sell wholesale capacity, who can interconnect, and who can compete in the last mile. These sound like technical choices. They are not only technical. They decide whether a new cable becomes public economic infrastructure or a private bottleneck with limited access. Take a landing station. This is the facility where a submarine cable comes ashore and connects into domestic networks. If other operators can access that landing station and backhaul on fair terms, the cable can support competitive wholesale bandwidth. But if access is restricted to a small number of players, the same cable can reinforce monopoly control. Same ocean, same fiber, different rules, different outcome. That is the direct contrast at the center of this act. The same cable can mean cheaper competitive bandwidth in one market and a protected bottleneck in another, depending on access rules. There's another contradiction here. Governments often want cheaper internet. They want digital payments, e-commerce, online education, cloud services, and public service digitization. But some policies can raise operator costs, including restrictive licensing, high sector taxes, high spectrum fees, or slow rights-of-way approvals. Spectrum is the radio frequency capacity mobile networks used to connect phones. If spectrum is expensive or limited, operators can face higher costs before the user ever opens an app. And rights-of-way matter because fiber has to pass through real places. Roads, bridges, cities, utility corridors. If permissions are slow or costly, the network expands more slowly and at higher cost. Open access regulation is decisive because it changes the incentive structure. Carrier-neutral infrastructure can help too. Carrier-neutral means a data center or facility is not locked to one telecom provider. Multiple networks can connect there, which can improve competition and interconnection. This is where agency enters the story. The fiber revolution is not only shaped by foreign capital or inherited geography. It is shaped by decisions about openness, competition, resilience, and public interest regulation. But while African states and telecom operators make these choices, a new class of player has entered the system with capital and scale few local actors can match. The new builders are not only telecom companies. They are global technology platforms, data center operators, cloud ecosystems, infrastructure investors, and internet exchange communities. And their arrival changes the control question again. Google's Equiano cable landed in Nigeria in 2022, with further landings including South Africa. It was designed to connect Europe with Africa, including landings in West and Southern Africa. Meta and a consortium of telecom and infrastructure partners announced the Two Africa Submarine Cable Project in 2020. Its aim was to encircle much of Africa and connect Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Landings proceeded in several African countries in 2023 and 2024, with commercial activation occurring in phases. This is not charity infrastructure. It may bring capacity and improve performance, but the incentives are commercial. Global platforms need lower latency, better user experience, more platform usage, and stronger cloud adoption. Latency means delay. If a service responds faster, users notice. Video loads better. Payments feel smoother. Cloud software works more reliably. Now return to the strange clue from the beginning. Some African traffic has historically traveled to Europe and back, even when both endpoints were on the continent. That can happen when local interconnection and local hosting are weak. An Internet Exchange Point, or IXP, helps fix this. It is a place where networks exchange traffic locally instead of sending it through distant foreign networks. That can improve latency and potentially lower costs. Data centers help too. They are becoming digital ports. Inside them, networks, cloud providers, enterprises, content platforms, and financial systems can interconnect. Content can be cached closer to users. Local businesses can host services nearer to customers. This is why data center investment matters. It is concentrated in a limited number of African markets, especially South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, and Morocco. And Lagos helps make this concrete. In Lagos, the abstract control stack becomes visible in one place. Nigeria is a major cable landing market. Lagos has mobile internet demand, startups, digital payments, data center investment, and regional connectivity pressure all at once. A payment, a delivery order, a cloud-hosted business tool, or a media stream may look like software. But behind are cables, towers, power systems, hosting facilities, and interconnection rules. Equinix completed its acquisition of MainOne in 2022, gaining West African data center and connectivity assets. That deal showed something important. African fiber and interconnection assets are now strategic global infrastructure. The platforms that once rode on top of networks are now helping build the infrastructure beneath them. The final question is no longer whether Africa will have more fiber. It is whether the continent becomes a producer of digital value or mainly a consumer market connected through infrastructure controlled by others. Here is the climax. Africa's internet is not controlled from one place. It is controlled through a stack. Start with the user device. The phone in someone's hand decides what services are reachable, what apps are affordable, and what device limitations exist. But the phone needs a network. Then comes the tower. Mobile network operators are decisive because most users in sub-Saharan Africa access the internet primarily through mobile networks. Operators such as MTN Group, Airtel Africa, Orange, Vodacom, Safaricom, and others carry the burden of spectrum, towers, backhaul, energy, and customer networks. Then comes metro fiber. This connects towers, offices, homes, data centers, and city networks. It can be controlled by telecom operators, wholesale fiber firms, or infrastructure companies. Then comes the national backbone. That is the longer-distance fiber moving traffic across a country. Incumbent telecom operators, wholesale carriers, and infrastructure firms can shape this layer. Then comes the landing station. This is where international capacity enters the country. Cable consortia, licensed operators, governments, and regulators all matter here. Then comes the data center. This is where networks, content, cloud services, financial systems, and enterprises meet. Data center operators, including Africa Data Centers, Terraco, Equinix, MainOne, and others are part of this layer. Then comes the Internet Exchange Point. IXPs and regional internet institutions affect whether African traffic stays local, how networks interconnect, and how the continent participates in global internet governance. Then comes the cloud on-ramp. This is the connection into cloud platforms and global software ecosystems. Google, Meta, and other technology firms have influence here because platform performance depends on physical networks. Then comes electricity. This layer is easy to ignore, but it limits everything. Data centers and network equipment need reliable power. Weak power infrastructure can raise costs and limit expansion. And then comes the regulator. Licensing, competition law, data rules, spectrum policy, rights of way, landing station access, and security regulation all shape the whole path. So when someone asks who controls Africa's internet, the honest answer is not one company, one government, or one cable. The answer is the stack. Control over that stack affects connectivity costs. It affects startup competitiveness. It affects digital payments, data location, surveillance capacity, cybersecurity exposure, cloud dependence, education access, and productivity. That is why this is not just an engineering story. It is a sovereignty story. It is a competition story. It is an economic development story. The long-term fork is clear. Africa can become a producer of digital services, cloud-hosted businesses, regional content, and technology companies. Or it can remain mainly a consumer market for foreign platforms, connected by infrastructure where the highest value layers are controlled elsewhere. The resolution should not recap the layers. It should ask what kind of system can still be built from here. The future is not sealed. More cable landings are coming. More inland fiber is being built. More carrier-neutral data centers are emerging. Demand for local cloud regions is growing. Cross-border data regulation and digital sovereignty debates are becoming harder to avoid. The risk is a two-speed continent. One Africa becomes a set of coastal and regional hubs with cheap, low-latency connectivity, strong data centers, and competitive wholesale markets. Another Africa remains inland, rural, tightly controlled, expensive, or underserved, even when fiber passes nearby. But that risk is not destiny. Countries that make landing stations open, encourage carrier-neutral data centers, protect competition, improve electricity reliability, reform rights of way, and connect inland regions to coastal capacity are more likely to become digital hubs. That is the hopeful part of the fiber revolution. The same infrastructure that creates dependency risks also gives governments, firms, and regional institutions tools to build something more open, more competitive, and more resilient. Not because fiber is magic, because choices compound. A fair landing rule can change who buys capacity. A stronger IXP can keep traffic local. A reliable power system can make a data center viable. A competitive mobile market can turn wholesale bandwidth into affordable access. A cross-border fiber corridor can make a landlocked market less isolated. So think of Africa's internet not as a single cable and not as a single app. Think of it as a stack of infrastructure choices. And if you want to understand where Africa's digital economy is really being built, watch the next story on the companies, governments, and corridors shaping the continent's digital future.